We are going to take a look at the History of Mass Tourism homepage now. And you will see that the site is separated by tabs at the top here for easy navigation. And a good place to start is the introduction page to get familiar with the resource. Here you'll find a number of different options. We're going to go into the nature and scope to get to grips with the resource itself. So this provides an overview of the collection and allows us to explore the key themes and features that can be used for teaching and research. Bringing together collections from multiple archives, including Thomas Cook, the History of Mass Tourism resource represents an untapped multinational perspective on the evolution of affordable tourism from circa 1850 to 1980, essential for both students and researchers of social and cultural history. And despite the bulk of material ranging between 1850 and 1980, there are documents dating back to 1789 within the collection. With every continent represented, the resource gives a broad overview of the destinations available for the average traveller throughout this period, along with specific case studies on pivotal geographical areas, organisations, subjects and travel agencies important for the history of tourism. Available online for the first time, significant material has been taken from the Thomas Cook archives, and this allows research into the growth of the world's oldest travel agency and a major pioneer of package tourism. Document selection for the resource has focused on printed and ephemeral items promoting Thomas Cook to holidaymakers, supplemented by handwritten 19th century journals from early Thomas Cook escorted tours, and context on how imperialism and empire helped shape the growth of the tourism industry is provided by guidebooks and handwritten travel journals from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Here we can see key themes, additional supporting material, and highlights from the collection split by archive. What we're going to do now is go back to the top navigation tabs and take a look in the documents section. In here, we can see all of the documents within the Mass Tourism collection. You can jump to a letter if you know what you're looking for. You can browse and filter by document type, theme, library or archive, and region. Alternatively, we can use the advanced search filter in the right-hand corner here. Usual Boolean filters to type in something that we're looking for specifically. If we're not, we can click on document type, theme, library, archive, region, or letter on the previous page. And we can also take a look at the search directories created by our in-house team that can be found here at the top alongside advanced search, which is a great place to start. If anyone's familiar with Adam Matthew resources, you might notice that this replaces popular searches, and the name is the only thing that's changed here. This in itself is separated by keywords and country or state. We now found ourselves in the Explore tab. So whilst we're here, we're going to look at the other features on offer. And these really are essential for classroom engagement. The interactive world map is another great starting point for using the resource. It allows researchers to easily search for documents related to region, country, and US state. So what we can do is click on a region that is specific to our research and filter down. So here we have our search results page. Heading back into the Explore tab, we also have all 4 essays are written by academics and collection specialists on the history of mass tourism, and subject matters include Thomas Cook, national parks in America, travel for educational purposes, and the relationship between race and tourism. The business of travel feature is great for researchers who are looking for a particular tourism business or organisation, as they can jump straight to the section to find short biographies of the main businesses and travel agencies. The eyewitness travel section includes introductions to some of the fascinating travel journeys included within the history of mass tourism. The accounts provide fascinating insights into the changing nature of vacations around the globe. Within these leisure records, researchers can discover the evolution of transportation, the development of affordable tourism, charting the changing prominence of destinations and vacation types, and discussing attitudes towards different races and cultures across the decades. Many volumes include postcards, illustrations, and ephemera from the journey, making them an invaluable historical record for the study of popular tourism. And as usual with Adam Matthew resources, we also include external links for further support, and another place, the search directories, as mentioned earlier. So now we're going to have a look at the galleries. We have an image gallery, a map gallery, promotional tourism films, and we have an online exhibition. We're going to have a look at the image gallery and see the options available to us as we click on an image of interest to us. So this is a document view screen. We've got our metadata in the top right hand corner here, which we can minimize. This is the document viewing station where we can zoom in and out. We can grab the resource and drag it around, and we can add it to our lightbox. And lightbox is a feature on all Adam Matthew resources which allows you to save certain documents and images from the resources into a personal. We can also download the image, and there are numerous other different tabs here. We can go to the home page. We can toggle to viewing the document in full page, toggle back out of that, and we can also rotate the document. Back to the gallery section, we're going to have take a look at the promotional tourism films, and this unique feature includes 18 promotional films being taken from the Thomas Cook Archives, the Polytechnic Touring Association at the University of Westminster Archives, later known as Lumpoly, and the Camping and Caravanning Club Archives. All films with audio have searchable transcripts which can also be downloaded as PDFs and can be switched off whilst the video is playing. Films can also be saved to your personal repository as well as documents. So here we can see the video on the left hand side, which we can open to view in a larger plane. We've got the transcript on the right hand side, which will scroll along as the video plays, and we also have a summary containing metadata on the document itself. So those are the promotional films, which really are a unique feature of this resource. We're going to go back to the galleries and take a look at the online exhibitions. So there are selected images from Blackpool and Coney Island which are put into context through this online exhibition, and I encourage you to take a look at these in your own time because they really are fascinating. And lastly, before we come on to the passing over to Dr. Anthony Stanonis, I want to take you through the chronology. Now, researchers can use this chronology to search through the resource, plus the history of travel and exploration from 1750 to 2013, which spans the discovery of Australia to almost the present day. Users can jump across the timeline at the bottom, or filter by category on the left-hand side here, or region. We can also view the chronology in this view if that's something that we want to add different items to this for our own research. I'm now going to pass over the controls to Anthony, who will be presenting on his contribution to the resource itself.
I thought I'd just run through a few of the items and sort of call attention to the material that's in here and why I got involved in it. Basically, back when I was a grad student, I started work on my hometown of New Orleans. And in writing that PhD in my first book, one of the things that I was constantly getting hammered on was the lack of tourist voices. That I had a lot of the promotional material that I could find in archives and use those and the records of the business community. But repeatedly I was getting the question about how did tourists experience the city? How do you get that access? And one of the problems is that people generally aren't tourists in their own hometown. So I could get access to materials in New Orleans, but there weren't a lot of scrapbooks and diaries about New Orleans that were actually in the archives in New Orleans. They were scattered, of course, in places like Chicago, New York, other places where tourists had come to the city. But as a poor graduate student, it was very hard to get access to those materials. So when I started working on my second book, Faith and Bikinis, Politics and Leisure in the Coastal South, I was looking at smaller places, Myrtle Beach and Virginia Beach, these sorts of towns that are now chronicled in this collection. Panama City, Florida, Biloxi, Mississippi, Galveston, and I was interested in sort of getting access to those tourist voices, so I started to gather up on my own materials that I would pick up at estate sales and eBay and those collections and sort of build a collection of critical mass that I could use, but also to expand into the American West and others that could sort of add to the experience of tourists. And it was sort of fortuitous. I donated this material to my undergraduate institution of Loyola, and then 2 or 3 months later, Adam Matthew contacted me about any archival collections that I was aware of in relation to mass tourism. And so obviously I was thrilled that these, I'd say over 50 diaries and scrapbooks that I had recently donated now is gathered together with material from Thomas Cook and the University of Florida, which has great collections, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and there's a flavoring of how these scrapbooks and diaries relate to the mass-produced materials like this pamphlet, New York to Florida, and we can start to see how average tourists used all this mass-produced material. And so, just to point out a few things about the mass tourism site, the mass tourism database is much more than just about tourism. And as you can see, there's material here related, for instance, slavery, going back into the antebellum period. There's great material on race relations. We have commentary in the diaries and scrapbooks about the civil rights movement, about chain gangs and the treatment of African Americans, and of course the poverty that people saw in the South or in the American West. We have diaries and scrapbooks of Native Americans and how tourists perceived them, and how Native Americans themselves were marketing their materials like baskets and drawings to tourists. And furthermore, we can see in these materials the way the travel is imagined, the way family is imagined. A lot of these scrapbooks and diaries have a gendered nature to them. A lot of scrapbooks are produced by women, partly because they were the traditional homemaker in the time in which scrapbooks were very prominent, which is roughly the sort of 1880s, but really early and mid 20th century. So we can see how mothers imagined their families, how they in some ways constructed their families. but we also can see how single women who had started to get jobs went out and experienced vacations such as those in Florida. And we can see how technology itself changes the way people relate to how they relate to each other via railroads and cars and planes. There's a great scrapbook story from the family that was traveling in North Carolina in the 1920s, talking about how locals with automobiles would drive along the 1 mile stretch of concrete road back and forth into the late night as a way of cooling themselves in the hot summers. So these sort of snippets of narrative of observation in small towns across the United States are there, and obviously via this collection on a much broader scale. The other thing, besides saying that the mass tourism databases and resources so much more than just about tourism, is that it provides a critical mass of how the average American created memory. And I think this is a very good example here. As you can see, yes, there's mass-produced material, but by being able to take that mass-produced material that's so often found in this collection and correlating that with how people actually deconstructed and then reconstructed to their own use mass-produced material, we can see how they engage with the dominant narratives of the business community and different businesses. So here we can see, for instance, the cutout of a railway map. This is a scrapbook from 1896. So we can see a railroad trip from New York. It ends up going all the way to Chicago, but we can see the cutting out of the map, the cutting out of the railway timetable, the ticket, cartoons that depict how that person imagined. So we see how the cartoon spoke to this trip. And also on the left side of the pages, these promotional literature of the ports and that this person felt was relevant to depicting their own travel. The important thing, and if you scroll through and search through this resource, is that we see how much care and effort went into the construction of these materials, especially when we come into so there's the business angle, but there's also how tourists themselves imagines. And this is one of my favorite examples. You can see how the carefully crafted scrapbook is there, and the love and attention that goes into telling these narratives, and how oftentimes they're not just collections of things here and there. They're oftentimes very long narratives. This is another example in terms of another scrapbook and diary where they tell a very detailed story about their trip and their experiences on that trip and integrate mass-produced items cut and pasted into those narratives. So I try to keep this a bit short. Obviously, I'll be happy to handle any questions. I hope this gives a sense of what the collections in this resource hold. I've provided an essay that goes into more detail about the different perspectives and trends in these materials. They largely date to the late 1800s, partly with the rise of mass production of material, mass publication, the rise of railroads and steamships, and sort of taper off by the 1970s with the rise of video cameras and jets, which made travel more instantaneous and more available to record in the moment. So you have fewer diaries and scrapbooks that go along, but I chronicle all that in the essay provided and go into more detail about what can be learned from this resource, from the various materials that are there about American society. And so that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Anthony. That's brilliant. That's a very brief introduction to our brand new resource, the history of mass tourism. So I do thank you for joining us today. The URL is masstourism.amdigital.co.uk.